Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to our Bryant Avenue Reconstruction project presentation. My name is Liz Heyman. I'm a senior transportation with Public Works at the City of Minneapolis, and I'm joined by my colleague.
Hi, my name is Trey Joyner. I'm an associate transportation planner with the City of Minneapolis.
And we'll be reviewing the project background, goals, and schedule, the existing conditions of the street, as well as how you can participate in this project. Just a note on communication for this project, at least until May 4th, all project communication will be done virtually or over the phone due to COVID-19. You can check out our project website for the most up-to-date materials. We're also hosting an open house on May 12th from 7 to 8 p.m. and we'll be attending virtual neighborhood meetings for South Uptown, East Harriet, and the Lyndhurst neighborhood in the coming weeks. So what is the Bryant Avenue Reconstruction Project? The project starts at Lake Street in the north and goes down to 50th Street West in the south. It's a 2.5 mile long project, and this is an opportunity to reimagine our right-of-way. When we reconstruct a street, we're taking the whole thing out and do have the opportunity to take a hard look at how we can reconstruct the street in a way that supports our current city goals and policies. So why are we reconstructing Bryant Avenue? Well, as many of you are tuning in probably know, the infrastructure is getting pretty rough out there. We will be replacing 60-year-old infrastructure, but we're also not only due to that asset condition need, but we are reconstructing the street because of the many people who use the street in many different ways. We know that there's people walking, biking, and taking transit all out on Bryant Avenue, and the asset condition and the existing and potential future users on the street are two main drivers for why we are reconstructing this street. So looking at the project schedule here, we are starting here in 2020 with the conceptual design phase, just kicking it off with this presentation here to you today. We do expect that this phase of the project to last until the beginning of 2021, where we'll be presenting a layout to City Council of our proposed design for approval. Then we move into our detailed design and engineering phase in 2021, and finally starting construction in 2022. And we do intend for this project to be a 2-year construction project ending in 2023. So what is our conceptual design phase? So this phase of the project is where we decide on our basic elements of the street. So that's if there's parking, how much, where is it included, if there's a bicycle facility, and what that design looks like. How wide are our travel lanes? So those just very basic elements at each point along the corridor is what gets decided and analyzed and discussed during this phase. So it's really important that we hear from you now because after we move out of the conceptual design phase, it's very unlikely that the basic elements of that street will change. So there are 3 main parts to what makes up the conceptual design phase of our projects, and that's our city policy, our technical analysis for the project, and then stakeholder feedback. So hearing from people who live along the corridor who use the street every day. And I'll go through a little bit about each of these in more detail. So first, our guiding city policies that we look to when we start to design the streets. We have a host of these, one of which is our Vision Zero Action Plan, which is a plan to eliminate deaths and severe injuries on our streets. We're also looking at our draft transportation action plan, and the guidance there is a 10-year vision for transportation within the city of Minneapolis, as well as our complete streets policy, which tells us to prioritize our most vulnerable street users first within our street design. So looking at safety for pedestrians as they walk and use our streets. And lastly, it's important to note that Minneapolis has declared a climate emergency, which tells us to use all of our projects and resources to address climate change. So looking at the goals and guidelines within those city policies, we have set up 5 overarching goals for the Bryant Avenue South Reconstruction Project. And it's important to note that these are our public works project goals. We are looking for feedback from stakeholders, so you can check out our project website, and you can let us know if you agree, disagree, if you think we should be prioritizing things in a different way. But for Public Works, these are the goals we have set up at the outset of our project. So the first one is to improve pedestrian safety, access, and comfort. That's looking at potentially narrowing crossing distances, trying to slow speeds on Bryant Avenue. That also means trying to put in more space for boulevards, so we can have plantings or potentially trees with more shade for people walking. The second is to create an all ages on all abilities bicycle connection in the area. You can learn more about what this means in detail in our draft transportation action plan, but looking to create a low stress environment for people to bicycle in the area. Third is to support existing and future transit service in the area. Next is to use green infrastructure to collect and treat stormwater runoff. And lastly, to accommodate business deliveries and customer access. I did want to highlight our green infrastructure goal. The city has already been using green infrastructure in multiple other locations and other projects, but it is relatively new to be thinking about it this early in our conceptual design phase for our street reconstruction projects. And one of the reasons we're doing that is because Bryant Avenue is in a location that is particularly well suited for investment in green infrastructure due to the existing soils and density of development. You can see on the map here, the green areas in the city are places where the city is looking at prioritizing investments in green infrastructure, and the red line that shows the Bryant corridor shows that this is a location that is ripe for this type of investment. Green infrastructure can mean a range of things on our street projects, everything from native plantings to creating wide boulevards and spaces that support larger trees. It can mean rain gardens, or it could mean specific infrastructure that are pollutant removal facilities that are embedded into the infrastructure in the streets. So we're really excited to be taking on this goal for the Bryant Avenue South project and hearing what stakeholders think about how we can use this type of infrastructure and technology. So next is our technical analysis piece of this. This looks at things like traffic counts. It looks at bicycle and pedestrian counts, parking counts, freight needs for businesses. And we, on Bryant Avenue, will really be taking a block by block approach in our technical analysis for this project, because we know the context on each block is very, very different. So for example, we know that in some intersections, up to 50% of the activity on an intersection is made up of people who are walking, biking, and taking transit. So that means a very different set of needs than for a place that is more heavily slanted toward vehicular use. That being said, this is going to be a conversation about trade-offs. We will not be able to include a dedicated facility for each of these modes at every location within the corridor, because we are working within a very constrained corridor, as Trey will touch on. We will look to our policies, our goals, and our stakeholder feedback as we review our data at each of these intersections at each block to make a decision about what the design for the street looks like in the future. And with that, I'll pass it over to Trey to do a review of our existing conditions on Bryant Avenue.
Thanks, Liz. So I'll be going over existing conditions for parking, speed, crashes, and activity at each of the blocks. So who uses Bryant? We know that Bryant has a multitude of users. Bryant serves a number of businesses, parks, residences, and the varied forms of transportation that access those destinations. Pedestrians, bikes, transit, and cars and trucks all are competing for a limited space. And as Liz mentioned, as we're looking forward to further design Bryant and envision what it may look like in the future, we know there will be trade-offs associated with future iterations of Bryant. So next I'll discuss how these varied forms of mobility use Bryant by looking at block activity, speeding, crash, and parking uses, as I mentioned. So existing street conditions, we know Bryant has about 60 feet of full right-of-way. That right-of-way is constrained in many areas due to encroachments from retaining walls and trees and stairways from residences, businesses, and apartments. We also know that Bryant has about 7.5 feet of width on either side of the road for sidewalks, and the curb width is about 40 feet. That basically breaks down to about 16 feet for parking and about 24 feet for travel lanes. Bryant also, as Liz mentioned, has no space for snow storage, stormwater treatment, or any dedicated bike or transit facility. So as I mentioned, these are a quick couple images of what encroachments look like and why we have that 55-foot constrained right-of-way on Bryant for the full length of the corridor. You can see that there are many stair encroachments, large beautiful trees along the corridor, and also retaining walls. So current bicycle infrastructure along Bryant. Bryant is a bikeway with share roads that were installed in 2011 as a part of a federal non-motorized transportation pilot program. Shares are basically street markings that indicate that the road is meant to be shared by a bicycle and cars and other modes. Bryant fits into the fabric of bicycle infrastructure in southwest Minneapolis by serving as one of the few direct north-south bikeways with access to shopping, dining, parks, retail, and recreation. So 5 Metro Transit routes also serve Bryant Avenue, with nearly 3,000 people accessing transit along Bryant on an average weekday. The solid lines in the image show local service, and the dashed lines show limited stop transit service. And as you can tell, that these are sporadically on and off Bryant for the full length of the corridor. So activity by mode and by block. So we know we've got a lot of buses on Bryant and as well a lot of bikes, peds and cars too. But block by block, how are these modes using the street and interacting with the infrastructure there? We'll do that by looking at the block activity on Bryant. So obviously some blocks are busier than others. Here we see activity isn't uniform across the corridor. At some locations like Lake Street, there's much more activity for obvious reasons. There's much more commercial activity there, destinations, and people in general, compared to other locations like 31st Street, where we have a lot less activity from the surrounding land use context and just on the street. So now to go on to travel patterns. This is looking at origin destination data where trips start and where they end. It's important to note that less than 4% of trips on Bryant Avenue go from one end of the corridor to the other. And what does that mean? Bryant isn't a thoroughfare, and an overwhelming majority of people driving and visiting destinations on Bryant or traveling along the corridor do so for short blocks. So speed trends. Nearly 25% of all vehicles on Bryant Avenue are traveling above the posted speed limit of 30 miles per hour. And I'd like to call it the intersection between 44th and 45th, where about 10% of people are traveling above 40 miles an hour. So there's, at each block and at various locations along the corridor, vehicle speeds do vary. And it's important to have that context in when we're envisioning future concepts and alternatives for Bryant. And similarly, crash trends, they do vary for Bryant at different locations. Citywide, bicycle and pedestrian injuries are overrepresented in share of total injuries from automobile accidents. People in Minneapolis make about 18% of their trips by foot, but pedestrians are 29% of severe and fatal traffic injuries. And similarly for bikes, people in Minneapolis make 5% of their trips by bicycle, but represent about 16% of severe and fatal injuries. And Bryant is indicative of those stats citywide. We know that although bikes and peds represent a smaller percentage of trips along Bryant, they do represent a higher number of severe and fatal crashes and injuries. So they dip into parking. So we did a parking study. We looked at 5 days, weekdays of parking on Bryant and on Saturday. We noticed that there's about 800 spots along the corridor of available parking and about 600 on the side streets. On average, about 50% of the parking is occupied on Bryant. And here's a overview of where we kind of see parking utilization on Bryant. The green kind of denotes parking that is a bit underutilized in certain areas. As you can notice that those areas are kind of centralized, not where our business nodes are at. Blue represents parking at its ideal occupancy, which is about 20 or so spots filled of about 30 with the block size that we have. And then orange denotes parking availability that is excessively high, and we start to see adverse impacts to our transportation kind of local transportation network as cars are circling blocks and parking illegally. So I'll pass it off to Liz so she can talk more about how you can participate further with the Bryant Avenue South project.
So we get to our feedback part of the situation, and we're looking for your feedback on what our project goals are, what we should prioritize, and you can do that via a survey we have posted on our website. The survey will be available until June 1st. We also have a feedback map where you can tell us how you use and where and by what mode you use Bryant Avenue and how you get around, as well as improvements you'd like to see on the corridor. We also have a set of upcoming conversations, including, as I mentioned, a virtual open house from 7 to 8 p.m. on May 12th. It will be this same information and presentation that we're sharing, but there will be a live question and answer session at the end. We'll also be attending a set of virtual neighborhood meetings. We'll have those dates and times on our project website, as well as future community conversations and open houses that will be scheduled into the summer and fall when we start to have concrete options and concepts to discuss with stakeholders and residents along the corridor. So with that, I'll thank you for tuning in, and you have our contact information here if you want to reach out, and we look forward to connecting with you on this project.